The kitchen is quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the soft tapping of keys as he scrolls through another late-night webinar offer. A half-drunk cup of coffee cools beside a stack of promises, envelopes of courses, glossy seminar flyers, a bookmarked page titled Fast Wealth Blueprint. He's in his late 40s, the lines at the corners of his eyes map years of trying, some wise choices, some costly leaps. He tells himself this time will be different. Maybe this coach, this course, this system, he mutters aloud, as if speaking could force the world to align. The phone buzzes again, an urgent ad, an expert with a confident smile. He closes the laptop, rubs his temples, and the room tilts between hope and fatigue. You recognize him. Maybe you are him. Or maybe she is a neighbor, a friend, a reflection in the mirror who's learned to chase outward fixes because the inner doorway felt locked. On the wall a calendar is marked with goals, some reached, many postponed. Outside, morning light pools on the porch, indifferent and patient. Inside, doubt speaks loudly. What if I'm too late? What if I don't deserve this? What if I fail again? A voice enters, calm, steady, the tone of someone who's crossed dry rivers and found green valleys. You've done the work of searching, it says. You followed bright beacons and turned over stones. That effort is not wasted. But there's a subtle turn you've missed. The guide doesn't condemn it, instead, he leans in as a counselor might, pointing to a small, overlooked detail: opportunities are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive as a shifted thought, a chance conversation at the post office, a quiet recognition of a long-held belief that's ready to be reframed. In this first breath of the journey, the ordinary world is laid bare: habits, hopes, the catalogue of external solutions. The tension is intimate and honest, the aching desire for financial ease tempered by the fog of self-doubt. You feel the pull toward something different, but the threshold has not yet been crossed. What do you feel is blocking you today? Share that thought. If this resonates and you're ready to keep walking, stay with me and subscribe, and in the next moment the call to adventure arrives, unexpected and unmistakable. You remember the first nights, scrolling through endless courses, half-finished ebooks piled like unsent letters, a calendar full of webinars that promised a shortcut to security. Our protagonist, call them Alex, sat at the kitchen table while the house slept, the glow of a laptop painting the ceiling with blue light. When the host on the screen said, "This system will change everything," something in Alex leaned forward with hope. It was hope that had been trained to look outward, a new mentor, one more program, a strategy that would finally click. Yet after the purchases and the polished promises came the same companion as always: quiet doubt, that old whisper that starts with "you're not ready." The next morning the world didn't flip. Bills still waited. The neighbors still walked dogs. But small things began to happen: an offhand compliment from a client, a song on the radio that suddenly felt like a sign, a barista who mentioned a neighbor hiring. At first Alex dismissed these as coincidence. Hope had been trained to need louder proof. "I've tried everything," Alex told a friend over coffee. The friend simply asked, "What if everything you need has already begun to show up, but you're looking the wrong way?" That question landed like a soft knock. In the days that followed, scenes shifted from frantic searching to careful noticing. Instead of signing up for another evening of webinars, Alex wrote down 3 moments a day when something felt slightly easier, or when an idea surfaced without force. The list was small at first: a forgotten contact returning an email, an unexpected coupon that covered a needed expense, a neighbor who introduced themselves and mentioned a part-time opening. Each item seemed insignificant alone, but together they formed a pattern, a string of subtle doors that had been ajar all along. There were setbacks, old stories about scarcity rose like fog. "You don't deserve this," a familiar voice said, and for a moment the fog thickened. But the guide, calm, patient, reminded Alex to name the belief out loud, to ask, "Is this mine, or a habit I learned?" Naming it loosened the grip. The space that opened felt like breath. It wasn't magic, it was attention redirected, and from that attention came a clarity that let opportunities be seen rather than chased. What first small sign might be waiting at the edge of your day? If this scene resonates, a quiet light helps more people find it. Stay with me here. Next, we'll practice simple actions that turn these small signs into steady paths through the open door. He sits at the kitchen table as dusk settles, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of a clock that has watched enough late nights to know his patterns. Paper invoices fan across the wood like small white flags. He had believed the solution lived in seminars, certifications, that one perfect scheme that would make the ledger balance overnight. Tonight, though, he hears the quiet counsel in his own chest: what if you've been looking through the wrong keyhole? A knock at the door is nothing more than a memory, an earlier conversation with a guide who speaks with the calm of someone who has seen both scarcity and plenty. You chased answers out there, the guide says, as if reading the ledger on the table, because it's safer to blame the door than to look at the lock. The room, lit by a single lamp, feels suddenly large enough for truth. He replies, not out loud at first but in a tightening of the shoulders, yes, but I don't know how to change. The guide becomes practical, no platitudes, no overnight guarantees, just tools carved from years of measured outcomes. Start with noticing, she suggests. For 1 week, list 3 small coincidences each evening: a stranger's comment, a book opening to a sentence, an email that arrives exactly when you were thinking of a person. Then, reframe one limiting thought a day: I can't becomes, what if I could, if I tried differently. Translate insight into micro-actions: make 1 phone call, accept 2 invitations this month, offer help to someone without expectation. These are small, repeatable gestures that shift attention from desperation to readiness. He practices. At a coffee shop, the barista mentions his former neighborhood and the name of a local contractor he knows, an introduction he wouldn't have noticed before. At a market, he notices price tags framed as possibilities rather than verdicts. Each subtle synchronicity is a stitch, repairing the holes in his belief that opportunity is scarce. Doubt still arrives, but with less volume, curiosity answers now. If this resonates, consider giving this a small like: what do you feel is blocking you today? The door ahead hums with light, and he takes a breath, ready to step toward it. He sits at the kitchen table as morning light slices through the blinds, a map of coffee rings and brochures, promises of fast schemes and overnight fixes, spread before him like a cluttered altar. Across from him, the guide leans forward, voice calm as a lighthouse, and asks one simple question that starts to rearrange everything: what if the door you keep knocking on is already open? The room breathes softer. He admits, halting, that he has looked everywhere but inward, chasing the loud solutions while his own quieter signals were ignored. They walk through a small park, each step deliberate, the city murmuring around them. The guide teaches him a practice so practical it feels almost mundane: notice 3 small positive coincidences each day, name 1 limiting belief and ask, what's 1 different story I could tell myself? Then, together, they try it, out loud, like a ritual. I am resourceful, the guide says. Not because of money, but because you find paths where others see walls. He tries it, and the first time the words leave his mouth they feel unfamiliar and true. A barista hands him the wrong change. Instead of annoyance, he imagines the extra coins as a tiny wink from life, an unnoticed alignment. Later, in a crowded waiting room, a woman mentions a local meeting about small business mentoring. His ears prick. These are small things, but the guide points out that prosperity often arrives as a sequence of small doors, not as a thunderclap. He learns to reframe: scarcity becomes caution, fear becomes data, and each no becomes a redirection. There are moments of doubt, old voices insisting he's foolish to stop searching outward, but the guide's tone never scolds, it steadies. Habits are the scaffolding of beliefs, she says, so change the scaffold and the house will settle differently. He begins aligning daily choices with values rather than urgency. 1 budget line shifts from reactive to intentional, 1 conversation turns into a real connection. Opportunities that once slipped by now catch his eye. A text arrives, an unexpected invitation that feels like a test: apply what you've begun to practice or retreat to old habits. He looks up at the guide, heart quickening. If this resonates, tap like gently, and tell me, what do you feel is blocking you today? Subscribe quietly to stay with the journey. Soon he'll be asked to step through a real threshold. He sits at the kitchen table while dusk softens the city beyond the window, brochures and browser tabs cast like fallen leaves around his laptop. The room smells of coffee gone cold, the edges of his hopes feel dog-eared. He has been chasing courses, schemes, shortcuts, everywhere but inside. The guide leans in, not with a grand promise, but with a steady question: what have you been trying to fix outside that already lives within you? The question lands like a key on old wood, small and precise. She remembers the night she scrolled until sunrise, convinced the next program would rearrange fate. His voice, a counselor's calm now in the room, interrupts the script of urgency. You learn to search because searching felt safer, he says. It let you avoid facing the quiet beliefs that whisper not enough . For a moment the only sound is the refrigerator hum and the soft, guilty recognition of patterns. The protagonist answers quietly, I thought action was the cure. The guide smiles, gently, action without aligned attention moves you in circles. They walk through a memory, a job fair where a small conversation about a forgotten skill led to a side project, a neighbor's offhand remark that opened a door 6 months later. The scenes are ordinary: bus stops, grocery lines, the barista who said, "Have you ever thought of teaching?" But now the protagonist sees them differently, as breadcrumbs rather than distractions. The guide offers practical, repeatable steps. Begin each morning scanning for one tiny synchronicity, write 3 small decisions you can align today with abundance. When doubt arises, reframe it aloud: this is learning, instead of this is failing. He demonstrates how belief and attention act like lenses, tilt them and the landscape changes. Emotion swells but stays grounded: relief, not zeal; curiosity, not desperation. They practice together: notice, name, choose. The protagonist feels the tide turning when a small opportunity that once passed unnoticed now stops, knocks, waits. Before the night ends, the guide asks, gently, what felt different when you simply noticed? It's a simple question, and if it reached you too, leave a quiet like, then tell us where you felt a shift. Subscribe if you want the next practice. We're about to take that first noticed opportunity and test it. The morning light slips through the blinds like an invitation. He sits at the kitchen table, coffee cooling, bills scattered like old maps, and the familiar ache of not enough at the base of his throat. I sit across from him, not as a lecturer, but as someone who's walked this corridor and knows the walls. You keep looking for a different door, I say, when the hinge has always been on your side. He laughs, a small, skeptical sound. Easier said than done, he replies. That honesty becomes our doorway. We begin small. The first practice is noticing. For 5 minutes each morning, name 3 subtle things that feel like a yes: an email that arrived, a neighbor's recommendation, an idea that sparked while washing plates. He rolls his eyes, then does it. By the 3rd day he texts me, found a client in a coffee shop I would have ignored. The environment shifts, not because the world changed, but because his attention did. Next, we unearth the story beneath his resistance. He reads aloud a sentence he often thinks, I don't deserve to be wealthy. We rewrite it together into a question: what would it feel like to deserve abundance? The question cracks the old pattern. Reframing transforms a wall into a window. He begins to keep a yes journal, small entries of evidence that prosperity is possible. Each entry is a pebble added to a bridge. Practical alignment becomes ritual. He makes 3 micro-choices each day that honor abundance: answering one call he would have ignored, investing 30 minutes in a skill, and saying no to a draining offer. These are not grand gambles, they are muscle memory for possibility. Scenes unfold: a late afternoon call that turns into a freelance opportunity, a casual comment at the gym that leads to a referral. Synchronicities appear less like miracles and more like the natural consequence of an attuned life. Emotionally, relief arrives in slow waves. Fear recedes enough for curiosity to take its place. We talk about fear as a faithful messenger rather than an enemy. What is it trying to protect? He asks. Comfort, I say. But comfort isn't growth. If one small practice could open a different path this week, what would you try tomorrow morning? Stay with that question, and if you want the next steps, where tests become momentum and small wins accumulate into real financial shifts, come back and we'll walk through them together. He wakes before dawn, not because of an alarm but because the house is quiet enough to hear the small pulse of possibility. The guide had given him 3 simple practices: a 5-minute gratitude scan, a 10-minute question that refuses to be answered too quickly, and a tiny action, something so ordinary it wouldn't trigger resistance. He sits at the kitchen table where morning light pools like a promise, breathes, and begins. What would prosperity feel like if I treated it like a conversation, not a conquest? He asks aloud, and the question settles around him like dust motes catching sun. At first the mind protests with the old litany: not enough time, not enough skill, not enough luck. He writes each thought down and, as the guide taught, adds a counter-observation: I found a client referral last year after a casual call. I learned new skills in my 30s. I've survived worse and adapted. The act is mechanical, almost silly, but the silliness cracks something, a hairline fault in the wall of doubt. He notices his shoulders unclench. Later, on his walk to the bus, a neighbor he barely knows mentions a vacant bookkeeping role at a local firm. It seems small, but his chest tightens with a familiar electrical current: recognition. If he had been looking outward for guarantees, he would have missed the offer, dismissing it as trivial. Now he leans in, asks for details, and an opportunity that once would have felt too small presents itself as a foothold. In a quiet scene at a cafe, the guide appears not as a teacher but as someone who remembers. Opportunities wear many faces, she says, stirring her tea. Your job is to see them, then to move toward them with tiny bets. He practices reframing. Instead of "I must win big now," he tries "I will test one small idea this week." With each tiny bet, one polite email, one intentional meeting, one revised budget, he finds confirmation: a client responds, a friend makes an introduction, an invoice is paid earlier than expected. Doubt still murmurs, but less insistently. The room feels larger, possibility more ordinary and therefore achievable. He begins to catalogue coincidences not as luck but as signposts, numbers repeating, conversations circling back, timing aligning, and learns to act when they appear. What barrier feels most present for you today? If this struck a chord, stay with us for the next step, where we turn these small wins into steady momentum. The morning light found them at the kitchen table, a chipped mug steaming, an open notebook where scribbles of courses, names, and half-finished plans once crowded the margins. The guide sat across, voice soft as the light: start small. Notice. They looked up, surprised at how ordinary that instruction felt, like a door key. The scene is quiet but charged: the hum of the refrigerator, a neighbor's distant lawnmower, the way sunlight bisects a page. This is where practice replaces panic. He began to teach them simple, repeatable rituals. Every evening write 3 small wins, each morning say a 1-sentence intention tied to real action, and carry an opportunity notebook, a place to record coincidences, ideas, and invitations that would once have slid by unnoticed. Not every sign is cosmic, the guide smiled, but training your mind to see patterns is how doors stop looking like walls. They tried it. Within days, they noticed a former client resharing an article they'd written, a coffee shop conversation sparked a lead, a casual compliment led to a connection. Synchronicity, it turned out, isn't mystical magic but a practice of attention. The work of reframing followed. When old beliefs rose: I'm too late, I'm not ready, the guide taught a question that cuts through doubt: is this thought absolutely true, or a story I'm telling? They practiced answering with evidence and with possibility. Belief shifted from a verdict to an experiment. Emotionally, fear softened into curiosity. Practically, they began to align choices with the person they wanted to be, saying no to time-wasting commitments, saying yes to learning that directly served growth, reallocating small amounts of money to skills and relationships that compound. There were quiet dialogues, too, admissions about lost years, laughter at stubborn habits, the relief of being seen. Each small change created room for unexpected invitations. Opportunities that had been invisible suddenly threaded themselves into everyday life. If any of this resonates, gently tap like and tell me, what do you feel is blocking you today? If you're ready to keep walking, subscribe and we'll explore the first doorway that opens when the inside aligns with the outside, where the real threshold awaits. He sat at the kitchen table as late afternoon spilled gold across unpaid bills and a laptop that felt heavier than it should. The phone buzzed, a neighbor asking if he could help with a bookkeeping question, and for a moment old reflexes rose: decline, hide, tell yourself you're not ready. Then he remembered the guide's quiet voice at the coffee shop, start by noticing the small doors. He put down his mug, breathed, and listened to the sound of the house. The world felt less like a closed fortress and more like a hall with many doors he'd never learned to recognize. You don't need a miracle, the guide had said the night before. You need small, deliberate moves that line you up with what's already possible. He tried it. He named the thought that boxed him in, I'm too late, I'm not skilled enough, and then he reframed it out loud, I'm learning, I can offer value now. It sounded simple, almost silly, but naming it loosened the old knot. He replied to the neighbor, not with the usual excuses but with an honest, calm offer, I can help for a couple hours this weekend. The neighbor's relief and gratitude opened a doorway he hadn't expected, a referral to a small business owner who needed help organizing expenses. These were not fireworks. They were a series of tiny, luminous coincidences, an email that matched a skill he'd once dismissed, an invitation that arrived when he stopped hiding, the clarity that comes after 10 minutes of real focus. He began to practice 3 things every morning: 1 minute of gratitude for money already present, 5 minutes of visualizing the next useful action, and 1 concrete step before noon, a phone call, a draft email, a simple plan. Each action rewired the story in his head from scarcity to possibility. When doubt crept in, he spoke to himself the way a counselor would speak to a friend. What if I fail? He asked quietly. Then you learn, the guide whispered back in memory. Failure is data, action is proof. That shift changed his posture at the table. The bills didn't vanish, but opportunities started to show up in the margins of his life: small clients, a modest freelance gig, a neighbor's unpaid referral fee paid promptly. If this scene feels familiar, if a small door at your own table is stirring, give this a like and tell me, what do you feel is blocking you today? In the final chapter, we'll weave these openings into a daily ritual that keeps prosperity steady, not fleeting. He stands at the threshold, hand lingering on a door that is warm to the touch, sunlight spilling through the crack and scattering like coins on the floor. Around him, the city hums, cars, distant laughter, the steady rhythm of ordinary life, and for the first time it feels like the music is in harmony with him. The guide's voice, calm and close, breaks the silence. You were never meant to push harder, she says. You were meant to notice. He remembers the nights of searching, late emails, glossy promises from courses that never fit, and frantic lists of must-haves that felt like ladders to nowhere. Inside, a quieter scene replays, the early morning when he wrote 1 small gratitude, a single line in a notebook about a favor returned. A tiny synchronicity followed, a neighbor mentioning an opening at work, an old client replying to a message, a coin found under a park bench. He had almost missed them. Now, guided by the steady counsel he's come to trust, he breathes and practices the simple moves that changed everything. He journals 3 possibilities each morning, small, believable steps. He pauses twice a day to ask, what is showing up for me, rather than what am I missing? He reframes the old script that whispered scarcity into a new sentence, I am a magnet for sensible opportunities. Each practice is ordinary, repeatable, and surprisingly generous in its results. You don't need permission from the world, the guide reminds him. You need permission from yourself. He laughs, a quiet, relieved sound, and steps through. The room beyond is not a treasure chamber of instant riches, but a workspace filled with real tools, a clear budget that reflects values, a calendar with small calls, a mentor's number written on a sticky note. The abundance here is practical, cumulative, human. As the scene settles, the guide leans close and asks, with the same inviting softness that opened this journey, what do you feel is blocking you today? If this story landed with you, a gentle like helps others find it too, and if you want more honest, steady guidance, come along, subscribe and we'll open the next doorway together.